Good morning, everyone. It's week 7. We're in the war room. We're ready to get things kicked off with Pro Football Focus Fantasy. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, back from a 1-week hiatus. The incomparable Mike Clay.
There it is.
And I got to come up with a better terminology here. How about this? And Pat Thorman, who's always classing the joint up. Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Man, it just seems like one of them tricky weeks. I just keep looking at my rankings. It's one of them weeks where I feel like I'm way off the radar. I think from kind of the consensus, because I have a lot of weird guys ranked high, a lot of top guys ranked low, and a part of that is really, I think, the defenses, the matchups we're looking at this week. For example, Denver going up against San Francisco. And I guess the other key one really is the Lions. That struggling offense hosting the Saints offense. The Lions defense very good, so it makes the Saints a little bit tricky too. So really, really interesting week this week.
Yeah, it seems like there's some duds on the slate. I mean, you look at that Tennessee-Washington game, and but there's fantasy value to be had out of that game. And yeah, it is very tricky. That San Francisco game is going to be interesting, not without Patrick Willis in the defense. So much going on. What's going on with you, Pat?
No, I'm doing good. I echo what you guys are saying about this being a tricky week, especially with the Saints coming off a bye. You know, they got a couple weeks to kind of get their act together, but like you said, they got a tough defense to go up against, and even the Giants and the Cowboys. I mean, the Giants were ripping along, running a lot of plays until last week, and then it all kind of fell in on itself, and now they got the Cowboys who don't let up a lot of plays. So there's a lot of like you guys were saying, tricky matchups. I'm interested in seeing how they play out.
Yeah, we're going to dive into those here in a sec, but I just want to plug our sponsor, DraftKings. Over the last couple of weeks here, people have been winning $1 million in contests there, the Millionaire Maker. Just $27 to enter that contest, and you could walk away with $1 million. That's unbelievable. And if you haven't gotten in on this daily fantasy craze yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. I mean, just the potential of winning that kind of money in a single week is unfathomable. And we have a great deal for you. If you're watching this on the YouTube feed, you're not a subscriber, and you want to get a subscription to Pro Football Focus Fantasy Gold, you can do so by heading over to DraftKings and making a small deposit, just $10. I mean, you can put more in, but $10. Use the promo code PFF. Or click the link via our page, and you get Fantasy Gold for free. I mean, you can't beat that. You're going to start playing daily fantasy. You're going to read Pat Thorman's column. You're going to use our tool based on Mike Clay's projections. You honestly can't beat that. So get in on it, and maybe you'll win $1 million. All right, let's hit up the start sits and all of our great information for this week. Right now, we don't have anybody actually in the chat. It looks like Dwayne just joined us. But, Dwayne, if your mic is active, you can ask a question. Or maybe not. Remember, if you are hanging out with us in the Hangout, you can ask probably the easiest way is to ask your questions through the chat. If you're on Twitter, you're watching us on YouTube, remember, use the hashtag WarRoom, and we will get to those questions throughout the course of the show. You can tweet at any one of us or all three of us, and we'll certainly get to those. But let's head to Twitter first, and every week we're getting tons of questions here. Mike, have you seen any common ones coming up so far this morning?
Yeah, I mean, the one we're going to get a lot today, and we should address it right off the bat here, is Jimmy Graham. I mean, what do you do with this guy? It sounds like he's pretty set on playing today, but the question is, what sort of role is he going to play? Is he just going to be a red zone guy? I mean, we hear this speculation all the time. The guy's going to be limited, the guy's going to be a full go, and then they're the opposite. So this is one of them situations where it's a very dominant player. It is a tough matchup with New Orleans going into Detroit, as we mentioned. So what do we do with this guy? And I mean, the question specifically I'm seeing here is against Jordan Reed, who has a good matchup. So what do you guys think about this one this week?
Well, I would take Jordan Reed. Like you said, he's got a good matchup, and with Graham, like you said, you're just kind of hoping for a couple of red zone targets. I know was it last year, I believe, that he played the Bills and he wound up scoring 2 touchdowns on limited snaps. But that was against the Bills. This is against the Lions, who are, I think, they're giving up less than 2 red zone trips per game. So even with the Saints offense being fairly high powered, they have struggled. And so I think his opportunities might be severely limited. If you do have a top 10, top 12 even option, that's probably the safer play.
Yeah, absolutely. Considering the targets that we saw with Reed last week, expecting that to continue where it left off, it's just, people are going to point to that game. Oh, well, he did it on minimal snaps, last year. But it's a risk. It really is a risk, and you don't know what limited work means. Does it mean only a few snaps in the red zone? Does it mean 50% of the snaps? I think you go with the safer play here, and you just put the points on the board, and Jordan Reed is that safer play.
One thing. I'm sorry. One thing I will say is it probably does help some other targets in the Saints offense. I mean, he's going to command a lot of attention. He's going to clear out some area. Colston plays in the slot in the general area. A couple of running backs in the backfield like Pierre Thomas or even Cooks. So those guys do get a slight bump in their matchup. Obviously Breeze does as well. Probably more so than Graham himself.
Yeah, and keep in mind, at times, even in the last couple of years, Jimmy Graham has not been on the field in the red zone. So, I mean, you may see him scattered in, play a limited number of snaps in the between the 20s, not necessarily when they're at the 7-yard line. So, that's something kind of interesting about Graham's usage that's kind of been mind-boggling the last couple of years. That being said, and I kind of wonder where you guys are slotting him in. I think that. There's if you look at the good fantasy tight ends, there's probably with upside and certainly good matchups, you could probably find about 11 or 12 ending with the Delaney Walkers or Vernon Davis, Jason Witten, those kind of guys. And then I think after that, that's kind of where he would slot in. I'm thinking kind of in that 12 to 14 range. What do you guys think? Where are you going to end up putting him?
I think that's fair. I think the kind of breaking point for me, I'm looking at my rankings right now. And it's right in that Dwayne Allen area. I think Vernon Davis is certainly an easier, a much better play over him this week, over Graham, because let's face it, who's going to cover him? Danny Trevathan would have been that guy, and now obviously that's not happening. Brandon Marshall struggles in coverage. They really don't have another linebacker who can do so, and really don't have a safety who's going to be able to cover him. So that could be a really intriguing play. But yeah, right in that range, I think is fair. Right around 12 is where it's exactly where I have Dwayne Allen right now. I think that's a good spot to slot him.
Yeah, I'm in the same general area. I have him just above Witten, who just isn't seeing too many red zone targets on a consistent basis. He's not that involved. He's blocking a little bit more, and obviously they're a more run-based team at this point. So yeah, I got him at I think 14.
All right, we have some folks hitting us up on Twitter here. I'm going to get to that one first. Remember, #WarRoom if you are watching this on the YouTube feed. And the question deals with Drew Brees. I mean, we're talking about Jimmy Graham, so this is certainly relevant to the general topic. How concerned are we with Drew Brees in this matchup? Drew Brees struggles on the road. He's going up against arguably the best defense in the NFL right now. And he has a banged-up Jimmy Graham. So, where's your breaking point for Drew Brees? Now, the question specifically is, are you going to start Carson Palmer over Drew Brees? So, I mean, maybe address that one, Mike, and then also sort of your breaking point like we just did with Jimmy Graham.
Well, here's an interesting fun fact from this season. The Lions have not allowed any opposing quarterback to throw more than one touchdown in a game this year. They held Bridgewater to 0. Before that, each quarterback they faced threw one each in each game, and that's Eli Manning, Cam Newton, Aaron Rodgers. There were some good quarterbacks mixed in there. So this is, you mentioned it, this is a very good Detroit defense. And Drew Brees, I mean, at home, he's one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. On the road, he's just, and we'll say, an above-average quarterback. So it's not like we're talking about normal old home, Superdome Drew Brees here. So where is he in my rankings? I'm not too fond of him. I mean, I'm probably going to end up lower than most. I think I have him, my projections here. I'm looking. He comes in at 16. I do think he'll get some volume. He may throw for 300 yards in this game and only throw one touchdown. It's going to be really key if he gets from that one touchdown to the number 2 touchdown. So, if I can bench him, I would. I'm never really high on Carson Palmer. I'm really low on him. So I would not use Palmer. I do think there are some other guys like Alex Smith who I like more than Brees this week.
Pat, your thoughts on Drew Brees here?
Well, I don't have him quite that low, but I believe I have him around 10, which is lower than consensus. I mean, his home road splits have always been, pretty lopsided, and he hasn't even been that great at home this year. That offense in general is I wouldn't say broken, but it's not clicking like it used to. They don't have much of a deep game. Breeze's accuracy percentage pretty much every year gets worse on deep balls. And he's been dealing with pressure up the middle this year, something he's never really had to deal with. I mean, the center and Goodwin and guard Yari Evans has been giving up pressure, whereas he's used to it from the left tackle. So that's something that's not conducive to getting deep, really opening up the offense. I mean, they did just have a bye week. Sean Payton's a smart dude, so there's some hope in that front. But they're going up against a couple of pretty tough defensive tackles. So Breeze is not gonna have a heck of a lot of time today, most likely.
Yeah, and a Ziggy Ansah on the rise after last week. Now, if you are in IDP leagues, though, don't read too much into this. This was a product of Matt Khalil, really just not performing well so far this season. He's made a lot of defensive ends look really good so far, Jerry Hughes owners. Anyway, going back to that original question, I think that you're still starting Breeze over Carson Palmer, but you do need to temper your expectations. And I think that, it's very fair to have him outside of that top 12 this week based on all the factors that are at play. But still, I can't see how you start Carson Palmer over him. All right, now, Jay, you're with us, and your mic's live. So you have any start-sit questions for us this week?
Sure. Obviously, you might have touched on this already, but I'm joining you pretty early in the session. Just checking, who do you see as the heir apparent in Seattle now that Percy Harvin's gone? And is he worth picking up, whoever this person might be, compared to dropping like the Darren Reeves out of Carolina?
Yeah, I'll hop in here. I definitely think it's Doug Baldwin. He's the guy I'd want here. This is a guy that was already running 30 routes a game, and now he's going to be in for a larger role in the target department. Seattle, they're a winning team. They're able to run the ball a lot in the second half, but they're more balanced than people realize in the first half of games. So, but there's going to be opportunities there for Baldwin, and I think he's clearly their number one wideout, whereas they're behind him, you're going to see a rotation. Jermaine Kearse will probably be an every down guy, but Walters, Lockett, Richardson, even Kevin Norwood will jump in there. They'll be rotated, and Luke Wilson, Zach Miller are both out, so I think Baldwin may see a pretty gigantic portion of the targets in today's game. So he's the guy I want. I think he's going to put up wide receiver 3 numbers the rest of the way.
And is he worth? I'm sorry, I'll listen to the rest before I ask my next question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
I would certainly have no problem dropping Reeves for Baldwin. I mean, Baldwin's going to move into the slot more, which is kind of where he's played his best ball. And like Mike said, although Seattle is super run heavy, they're actually throwing it a little bit more than they did last year. I think Baldwin's certainly the biggest beneficiary here, and Reeves isn't somebody I would cling to.
I do think Kearse also deserves a roster spot. We have to see how things shake out. Now, I think of the two, maybe a little bit higher ceiling with Kearse. Doug Baldwin, the higher floor. And as Pat knows from me and him conversing back and forth this morning, Kearse is a guy who I'm going to play in a lot of daily leagues this week because he's so cheap. And I think the potential for a little bit of a bigger play out of him, is certainly there. But anyway, toss it back to you for your follow-up question.
Yeah, as you might recall, I'm in a pretty deep league. So in this league I'm talking about, I'm in a 16-teamer, and it's a keeper as well, a big dynasty. So that's something I'm looking at as well. And unfortunately, because of the buys, I'm having to start Andre Holmes in Oakland and Ruben Randall for New York. I think Randall's going to have a great game, but I'm not sure about Holmes. And would you start somebody like Baldwin or Kearse over Holmes?
Well, I stick with Holmes. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, I liked Holmes a lot. I mean, up against Arizona, I think, this is an Oakland offense that's going to have to keep throwing the football. So I think he's in the top 20 conversation. So I wouldn't be too upset about having to start him this week. And Randall's a guy I love. I think he's a strong wide receiver, too, going forward. He's seen at least 30% of the Giants' targets in 4 straight games, and that was with Cruz active for 3.5 of those games. So, I mean, there's not a lot to love about Randall going forward.
Yeah, just to highlight a few things about Holmes. First and foremost, we've seen it now. This guy has wide receiver 1 upside in any given week. So now that you've seen it, you have to like that. The fact that the Cardinals have given up at least one passing touchdown, receiving touchdown to a receiver every single week, 2 in each of the last 2 weeks. He's clicking with Carr. Carr seems confident. Let's face it. Face the facts here.
What's up, babe?
San Diego is a somewhat good defense, although I think they're going to be exposed as we go forward here. And reminder to folks, if you're having conversations with your wives or whatever, just mute your mic while the show's going on. Anyway, Carr's really shown some improvement over the course of the season, so you have to like that play. I think you're fine with Randall. I agree with the consensus here. I think you're fine with Randall and Holmes.
Yeah. One more thing about Carr is the knock on him was he can't deal with a rush, and that is one thing Arizona cannot do. They can't get after the passer at all, so he's going to feel pretty comfortable today.
And that Oakland line,
love the advice.
Yeah, the Oakland line is performing very well. A really tough matchup so far for defensive ends. And yeah, with no Calais Campbell, with no Matt Shaughnessy, you're not going to see much of a pass rush out of Arizona this week. Now, the chat room is starting to fill up with some questions, so let's head on over here. And the first question at the top of the list is Joyke Bell or Michael Crabtree in a PPR. Mike, what are your thoughts there?
Easy one for me. I'm not a huge Crabtree guy. I think he may get a little bit more volume today with San Francisco probably having to throw the ball in a competitive game against Denver. That being said, I'm still going Joyke Bell here, especially with Reggie Bush coming off the injury. I think Bell is a borderline running back one option up against the Saints.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. It's a good matchup. They're going to want to run the ball, and Denver's got some pretty good corners that until he gets the pub. But Chris Harris is really good too. So that's a tough matchup for Crabtree.
Yeah, that's a sweep. I agree. Going with Joyke Bell there. All right, sticking with that game, Colin Kaepernick or Phillip Rivers. Kaepernick in what could potentially be a shootout in a game where Peyton Manning is probably going to want to throw some touchdown passes. I think that's what I hear at least. So are we going Kaepernick? Are we going Phillip Rivers this week, Mike?
I like Kaepernick. I mean, this guy is running the ball a ton. He just keeps putting up points with his legs. And again, with the majority of fantasy leagues, you get more points from a quarterback who's running the ball than you do for a quarterback that's passing the yard, just because of how it's set up 1 for 10 or 1 for 25. So Kaepernick's been doing a lot of that, and it really adds on to his value, especially since he's going to be dropping back more often. So may get more throws out of him and more scrambles. So I think he gets the edge over Phillip Rivers in this one.
Yeah, I agree once again. And like Mike was saying with the scoring, you don't really get hit too bad for interceptions unless your league has a different scoring system. And he probably will turn it over a couple of times. But his floor is super high.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. Plus, you have to like when Vegas likes a game for fantasy purposes, and Vegas does like this particular game. So going to go with Kaepernick there. Now, this is actually a topic we talked about last week, Mike, and I think this is a valuable one. If you have somebody who's in need, a streamer at tight end, last week we whiffed a little bit on Luke Wilson. I think somebody might have brought up Clay Harbor, though, which was a good play last week. So if you're really digging deep, Eddie has currently Jermaine Gresham in his lineup. Is there any tight ends, a deeper tight end who has a really good matchup this week you might be able to stream?
I think a guy that I see on some, I'm not going to say deep leagues, but maybe normal-sized leagues that ends up on waivers is Jared Cook. And, I mean, he's seeing a pretty massive volume of targets there in St. Louis. And I think with Seattle on the radar, it's a scary matchup, but also a game where Austin Davis, who's not afraid to throw it downfield and certainly not afraid to look to Jared Cook, is going to have to throw a lot of balls. So I think Jared Cook is probably a borderline tight end one option. I think he's the guy to look at. And if you're going a little deeper than that, I mean, Kobe Fleener probably seeing more action than many realize in a game, again, where the Colts are probably going to have to throw a lot. That game's over. Andrew Corliss, of course, had the touchdown last week. And Gresham, he mentioned Gresham. I think he's, probably best served as a back-end tight end, too. But, I mean, there is some value there with, again, Cincinnati. You're going to probably see two teams throwing the ball a lot in that Cincinnati Indy game. And, of course, Brandon Pettigrew. You have to bump him up with the number 2 and 3 tight ends there out in Detroit.
Yeah, I was going to say Fleener. That's a good call. I mean, Cincinnati's been getting skewered by tight ends, and that's going to be a pretty high snap volume game for the Colts, who have run over 80 snaps in each of the last 3 games, and Cincinnati's given up over 80 in each of the last 2 games. Really, really deep. Kyle Orton likes throwing to his tight ends. I know it wasn't just Scott Chandler against New England thing last week. He does like throwing his tight ends. He liked throwing it to Witten and even Escobar last year in his one start for the Cowboys. So if you're super, super desperate, Chandler is not a terrible long shot.
Kyle Orton also likes awkward facial hair. All right, we're going to head over to Bob. Bob's a weekly chatter with us here, and he's got a quarterback question. He's got Tony Romo. Would you start Tony Romo, or would you give the nod to Kirk Cousins against Tennessee? Mike, what are your thoughts on Tony Romo this week?
I'm going Romo. I know the Giants' pass D is actually keeping opposing passers in check, but I think that I think it really comes down to not being a huge Cousins fan. I mean, I don't think he's particularly good, and the Tennessee defense isn't doing fantastic, but they're doing well enough. They're probably an underrated defense just because that team is struggling. So I'm not a Cousins fan, but I do think Romo is still a borderline tight end one option. So for me, that's an easy choice.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Romo's playing some pretty good ball right now. I know he's not getting the volume of attempts that he had, but the Giants have a pretty good run defense. I wouldn't be surprised if they gave DeMarco Murray a little bit of a harder time than he's had recently. And I think it's an Alfred Morris day against Tennessee. I think they're going to be able to really keep it on the ground. I'm pretty bullish on Morris today, and that'll cut down on Cousins winging it around.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go Romo here, though I will say that this may be one of the games we see a little bit of a better performance out of Cousins because of the matchup. Bleedy Ray Wilson, which is one of the coolest names in the NFL, arguably Cortez Allen bad this season, so he could get picked on in this particular game, staying away from Jason McCourty. But yeah, you're going to go Romo there, and you're going to be happy you make that decision. Now, Bob has a follow-up running back question, and he's choosing between Ahmad Bradshaw, Zach Stacy, and Bishop Sankey, all players who sort of fall in a similar area in ranking. But Mike, what are you going to do if you have that dilemma? Ahmad Bradshaw, Zach Stacy, Bishop Sankey.
Well, first of all, I'm eliminating Stacy. I mean, we don't know really what his role is going to be. He probably gets to start there and get some, maybe 10 carries and a couple of targets. But up against Seattle especially, this is, the odds of him scoring a touchdown pretty slim. So get him off the radar right off the bat. Sankey and Bradshaw a little closer. I'm going to still lean with Bradshaw because the Colts offense is just on a tear right now, and Cincinnati is struggling to stop the run. So, I think I'd lean towards Bradshaw, especially since Sankey, he may get that big workload. He may just break out one of these weeks. I mean, it's probably coming here soon, and it's not an ideal matchup against Washington. They're doing decent against the run, but I think Bradshaw's just playing too well right now, and his role's on the rise in a great offense. That's the way I'd go.
Yeah, I agree once again. The Redskins have, like Mike said, a pretty decent defense. So you would imagine that Tennessee is going to take to the air, especially if Washington gets out front. Bradshaw's gotten so many red zone targets for a running back. It's unbelievable. It hasn't been stopped. And Cincinnati's had a hard time covering guys in the second level. So I think that until they start stopping, you got to assume Bradshaw's role is going to continue along those lines.
Yeah, and so far this season, Washington has only given up one rushing touchdown to running backs, so you can't really like that particular matchup. So, yeah, again with the consensus. An interesting question, an interesting situation in Carolina with Jonathan Stewart going to be back in action. And, Mike, I know you've looked closely at this particular matchup in this game and Stewart's role. So in terms of your projections, what are you envisioning for Stewart's role this week? How many carries do you think he'll get in this matchup this week?
Well, I think he's going to be very busy. It looks like Darren Reeves and Fozzie Whitaker both out. We know Whitaker's out. Reeves is on the fence, but it looks like he's probably not going to play. We'll know here in a few minutes. So that leaves Chris Openaya as really the only other running back, and that tells me Jonathan Stewart is going to be very, very busy. So I think he'll be up there over 60% of the carries, which is not something we see a ton in Carolina because you have D'Angelo Williams there, Mike Tolbert, Stewart. There's always this rotation, plus Cam Newton in the mix on some design runs. So probably a little boost for Cam Newton this week, but Stewart's going to handle a good chunk of the other carries. And at times, even week 1 and week 3 when he was out there for a good chunk of the game, he was up there near 10% or so of the targets too. So that's a couple, 3-4 looks out of the backfield. that really pushes his value up there in PPR league. So I like Stewart a lot today. I think that in this matchup going up against Green Bay, middle of the pack run defense so far. They may, if they fall behind, it could be troublesome. But I think this may be a competitive game with Cam playing so well. So I think Stewart's a top 20 option.
Yeah, Stewart's a sneaky guy too. If you are in these daily leagues, DraftKings this week 3,700. I mean, that's a bargain basement steal considering the workload that he could potentially see here. Pat, do you want to toss or throw any thoughts out there on Stewart this week?
No, I agree. I got Stewart in one of my GPP lineups. It's a matchup that really favors the running game. He might lose a little bit of goal line work. With Cam all of a sudden running again, which obviously is super helpful for his value. You would imagine they want to kind of slow the game down a little bit. I can't imagine they want to get in a track meet with the Packers. So at least to start, he's going to get plenty of work.
Yeah, you're going to have to agree with that there. All right, so Eddie has a question for us here, and he's looking at a flex play between Devontae Adams getting a little bit more involved in the offense, seeing some more targets last week, DeAndre Hopkins, who was disappointed over the last few weeks, and Pierre Thomas in a PPR. You go between those three, Mike: Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Pierre Thomas.
PPR makes it a little tricky. I'm going to go, you know what, I guess it really doesn't for me. It's a pretty easy one for me. I'm going to go with Hopkins. I've been down on him the last couple of weeks. I kind of saw it coming. He wasn't getting quite the volume I think people realized, and he was very touchdown dependent early on in the season. It's a team that's very run heavy, so it was not hard to believe he would take a step back. But considering the competition here, with Thomas, you have Ingram coming back. He's going to steal some snaps. And Adams still, as much as I love Adams, I mean, I have him on like a majority of my teams. It was not hard to see this coming if he took over that number 3 job in a team that loves the 11 package. It's not hard to believe he's playing well. Second round pick, of course. I do think he's a top 50 option, but I like Hopkins a little more. I think there's more upside, more potential for a touchdown there, and I think he's a slightly superior player. So I'm leaning towards Nuke in this one.
Yeah, I actually the first one that came to mind for me was Adams. To be honest, Carolina can't cover, and this year they're not getting the pass rush that covers up for that. And I would imagine that the Packers are going to score, and the over/under is pretty high. And Houston hasn't been running very many plays. It's a tough call because he's higher on the target chain for the Texans than Adams is for the Packers. And Mike made some good points there that kind of made me second guess myself, but it's close. But I would side with Adams.
It is very close. Let me throw that out there. I do have them within one fantasy point of each other, so I'm with you in that regard, Pat. It's close.
Yeah, I actually probably would be making the play with Adams here. I just feel based on what we've seen, this guy, he looks really polished for a rookie. It's almost hard to, it's easy to forget that he's a rookie when he's out on the field. But I feel like there's a big game coming for Adams, and, it's one of those situations I almost don't want to miss out on it. So I am starting him in a number of leagues this week. So I'm going to lean in that direction there. But, yeah, it's a tough call, very, very tough call. Jim is in need of a defensive back. We got a little bit of IDP going on here. And he's choosing between Reggie Nelson, Ladarius Webb, Patrick Peterson, or Prince Amukamara. We're going to toss Patrick Peterson out immediately. He has no tackle upside whatsoever. So, really, you're probably not going to want to own him unless it's a cornerback required league that's really deep. Do like Ladarius Webb getting back in action here. But in this case, I'm probably going to stick with Prince Amukamara. We'll see a lot of tackle opportunities, hopefully, for him in that game against the Cowboys. So I like that play the most there, as opposed to the streaky play with Reggie Nelson. So sticking with the high floor play, the guy who's going to put the most points on the board, Prince Amukamara. All right, we have a wide receiver question here. Oh, no, it looks like a flex question. Where we're picking 2 between Torrey Smith, Kendall Wright, Justin Hunter, and Ahmad Bradshaw. So you have to make 2 there, or play 2 there. Mike, who are you going with? You got your mute on.
Sorry, baby was crying. I had to mute it. All right, who am I looking at? Bradshaw, Kendall Wright, or the others?
Torrey Smith, Justin Hunter.
Hunter and Torrey Smith. Ooh, and I'm picking two here. I'm going to. I'm eliminating Torrey Smith right off the bat. I think he's well behind some of these other guys. I'm going to get Bradshaw in there for sure. He's going to be the running back there. At wide receiver, flex, whatever you're looking at, I have a tiny edge with Wright over Hunter, especially in a PPR league, but in standard as well. I think I have Wright just a tiny bit ahead of Hunter here up against Washington. So, that Tennessee wideouts, that's a tricky one. You just don't really know where the volume's going to go each and every week, but I like Wright a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Bradshaw for sure, and Wright slightly over Hunter because it's PPR. Had it been standard, I would probably go with Hunter, bigger play guy, easier touchdown opportunity. And yeah, and one thing on Torrey, I really do think he is ascending. I know that he only got 5 targets last week, and people are chalking it up to just the bad pass defense of the Bucs. But I mean, he got all 5 targets plus 1 that was called back for penalty right at the beginning of the game, and they kind of shut down their passing game. So I am still a buyer on Torrey Smith. He can still probably get him pretty cheap from an owner trying to sell high. And Steve Smith, I can't imagine a little guy like him at his age is going to be able to keep up this for the entire season. So I would try to buy high if that's what you want to call it on Torrey Smith.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that one there. And, talking about future outlooks here going forward for Torrey Smith, the future looks a little bit brighter than maybe for Steve Smith. But we're going to go to San Francisco here. Carlos Hyde. An interesting situation in San Francisco with the running backs. Frank Gore, of course, continues to play at his advanced age of 31, advanced age. Either way, getting up there, no doubt about that. And Carlos Hyde, we saw, was in the mix earlier in the season. But Mike, going forward, and I don't know if this is necessarily just a this week question from Kip, but going forward for the rest of the season, what's your outlook for Hyde? The rest of this year.
Well, I mean, his workload has actually been up. I mean, first of all, he's seeing they don't throw. Kaepernick doesn't throw to the running backs more often, so it's very minuscule. But he's seeing a tiny bit more of the passing game work there than Gore, and also the carries have kind of we've seen them kind of change between the first 3 weeks and the second 3 weeks. You see Frank Gore, who was at 48% of the carries, is up a little bit, but we're also seeing that from Hyde with some of Kaepernick's design runs actually going, instead of going to Gore, are going mostly to Carlos Hyde. So we've seen him see 31% of the targets the last 3 weeks compared to just 19 the first 3. So it's becoming more and more of a committee. It's still Gore's backfield, but I think there's a case to be made that Hyde is the most valuable handcuff out there. I mean, there's a couple other candidates, of course, that have a lot of upside, but Hyde is just so good. We've seen it. I mean, his yards per carry, a little concerning, but he's running a lot of between the tackles against base defenses, which is something we've seen Gore struggle with the last couple of years. So I like Hyde a lot. I think he's a guy that should be owned in all formats, if not ideally a flex option any given week, but a guy that you just keep on your bench as a plus handcuff guy.
Yeah, Hyde, one of the more complete backs. I mean, if you remember back, if you guys were following along with our coverage for the draft, he was a player who, I really liked. I had him as my top running back coming out of the class, not Bishop Sankey, and continues to look good out there. Now, he did struggle a little bit as pass blocker last week, but that's just going to be part of the learning curve. You're going to see that, and I wouldn't be surprised if we ultimately see him emerge as the go-to guy, even as early as this season, but certainly going forward. Dynasty absolutely going to own this guy. Pat, you have any thoughts on Carlos Hyde?
No, I was just going to mention, the longer outlook in Dynasty is super rosy. I mean, they're running Gore until the wheels fall off this year, and I would imagine that they're going to kind of send him to the glue factory after this season. So it's a great situation for Hyde going forward on a run-based team with a good offensive line.
All right, the chat room is quieting down a little bit, so if you're hanging out with us, if you have any other questions, you can feel free to put those in there. We're going to head back over to Twitter. If you're on YouTube, you're watching us on YouTube, remember #WarRoom, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. We have a question with Carson Palmer again. Carson Palmer or Joe Flacco following a really breakout week for Flacco. Mike, do you expect the touchdowns to keep coming this week? Would you start Flacco over Carson Palmer?
I would. As mentioned, I'm not a huge Carson Palmer fan. I know he was out there for a chunk, but that's not an offense that's scoring a ton of points this season. And going up against Oakland, I anticipate this is a game where Andre Ellington should easily get to 20 carries. And if not him, he'll get some help from, it looks like Marion Grice is going to get some work in this one as well. So I think that running game is going to be busy against Oakland unless Derek Carr just comes out and lights it up like he did last week. So not a huge Palmer guy, and I think Flacco, of course, he's going up against Atlanta here. I think he has a pretty, I don't want to say easy day, but a plus matchup. So top 15 week for Joe Flacco.
Yeah, I have them actually one apart, 13 and 14. I have Flacco just ahead of Palmer. They're in a similar situation. Of both of their respective running games do have good matchups, as well as they have good matchups in the passing game. So I don't think they have super high floors, but they're both fairly solid starts, and I have Flacco just barely edging out Palmer.
Yeah, agreed, and I like that you bring up Marion Grice. This is a kid who was he was drafted by the Chargers. He was on their practice squad, and Arizona scooped him off the practice squad, or else we might not have Brandon Oliver right now. I mean, who knows what would have happened if Grice was there? Maybe there would be more of a split between these two guys. It's just so strange how all these things happen, and there's that trickle on down the lane effect with any move that takes place in the league. Now, I have an IDP question on Twitter here from Mind Crush. So I like the handle, I guess. Anyway, it's he asks, is it time to bench Robert Quinn? And this is a guy who I've talked about in my columns this week. Yes, he's been disappointing. Yes, you didn't draft him for this, but remember, this is why I tell you every year: load up on offense, wait at IDP. You'll be just fine. You don't need to draft Robert Quinn in the 4th round. That being said, you're going to still play him. We know the ceiling is elite level. It's J.J. Watt level when things start clicking. This is a Rams defense that hasn't clicked as a whole. 1 sack on the entire season for the Rams defense. That obviously is a league low, and that's going to have to change. Could change as soon as this week. I'm definitely starting him, and your other option, it looks like, is Michael Bennett. I'm starting him over Michael Bennett for sure. It looks like this scoring system is decidedly tackle-heavy, though, so you may want to look in another direction entirely here. You want to look at possibly dual eligibility outside linebackers who are going to put up some tackles. That's really why Robert Quinn is struggling for you, because he's just not putting up tackles either. But you're hoping for sacks there, and if you have him, you're going to continue to start him. All right, we have some questions lining up here in the chat room, so we'll get to these first. In a PPR, Jim has a choice between Mike Wallace, Cecil Shorts, or Sammy Watkins. Obviously, Wallace, really the guy in Miami. Shorts coming off a week where he saw 15 targets from Blake Bortles and decidedly now being the number 1 option there. And then Sammy Watkins as well, a little bit better with Kyle Orton in there at quarterback. So, Mike, who are you going with if you have this particular choice?
I have them all within a point of each other in my projections. I think it's a tough call. Shorts just, I used him in daily last week. He was basically free, and he got you 20 points in PPR. This is a guy that's seen over 30% of the targets in his 2 full games this year, and he was up near that high whenever. He's always that high when Justin Blackmon's out. He's one of the most targeted players in the league when he's active and Blackmon's out. So Shorts just painfully undervalued. He's a very terrific player as well when he's playing out there. So I think he's a top 20 option. I think Watkins is borderline top 20 option. But I'm going to give the edge to Mike Wallace up against Chicago this week. I think he gets a tiny edge. Don't get me wrong; it's very close. But that'd be my pick.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be a higher scoring game. Wallace probably get a few more red zone looks. Am high on Shorts for all the reasons Mike just said. He's getting a ton of targets. And Watkins had a slow week last week, but he had Revis on him for the most part. And so he's still kind of somebody that's been quiet, but has a potential for a lot more with a guy like Orton, who's a professional quarterback, versus what he was dealing with Manuel. I actually have Watkins in a GPP lineup this week. I think he's kind of sneaky, but Wallace is the play here.
Yeah, agreed. I do like Shorts. I think, and I agree with Mike. He's not super cheap this week, but still cheap enough at I think 5,400 off the top of my head in DraftKings. So a good play there, but you're going to go with Wallace in this particular matchup. Now in a half-point PPR, needs upside. Now, Mike, I know Mike's philosophy here is, upside, it doesn't matter. You want to play the guy who has the most points. So in this case, Malcolm Floyd or Larry Donnell. We've seen Donnell obviously, on the downward slope over the last couple of weeks. Floyd is a very hit or miss play. So, Mike, what's your projections telling you this week? What do you think about this particular decision?
Well, as far as I know, it looks like Royals a go today. So, he was seeing more of the targets than Malcolm Floyd was. So for me, I'm going with Donnell. He's still getting a decent volume, and with Victor Cruz out, he just has to be a part of the offense. It's an offense we know wants to use the tight end. For me, this is an easy call.
Yeah, I agree. They're playing Dallas, who struggles against tight ends. Him and Randall are the big red zone options. Dallas a little bit stronger on the corner than they are covering in the middle. Like Mike said, Floyd's kind of a boom or bust here, and Donnell's the play.
Yeah, you do like that. I mean, up until the last 2 weeks when they faced two teams who essentially really don't have tight ends in Houston and Seattle, they don't have really relevant pass-catching tight ends. The Cowboys were just giving up loads of points, loads of touchdowns. They've given up 6 touchdowns on the season to tight ends. So you do like that. You like the higher floor. You like the more ability to put up points. If that long Malcolm Floyd touchdown happens, sure, you kick yourself, but you can't bank on that happening. You want to put the points on the board. Larry Donnell is that guy. All right, Eddie has another question for us, and Brandon Oliver coming up. So Brandon Oliver at flex over Mike Wallace, Keenan Allen, and Andre Williams. Mike, you'd make that play, right?
What is it? Wallace, Allen, who else?
And Andre Williams. So he's starting Oliver over all 3 of those players.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd go Oliver.
I agree.
Yeah. And I guess the rest, absolutely, yeah, and it's a PPR. So Oliver has over 300 total yards in the last 3 weeks, 3 touchdowns. And let's face it, the Chargers actually haven't been that good in the run block. So this is even more impressive when you put it into perspective. And they obviously have that commitment to the run game. So we're going to continue to see more Brandon Oliver here. All right, Kip has a question about Percy Harvin, and we really haven't discussed the long-term outlook. We discussed the fallout in Seattle, but in terms of Percy Harvin, does this affect the run game of the Jets? Do we see a bump for Ivory? Do we see any sort of bump for, maybe Decker? I mean, what's the fallout here in New York with Percy Harvin, Mike?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of implications, but I'll try and bang through this pretty quickly. I mean, first of all, the Jets' running game, aside of maybe a slight bump in touchdowns for this offense, I don't think it's going to be much because we have Geno Smith. He's doing all right. He's doing decent. He's managing that offense. They're leaning heavily on the run, however. I don't think there's going to be a huge boost here. They're pretty much scoring touchdowns at the same rate they were last year. I think it hurts the running game a little bit, including Ivory, just because he may lose a carry or two a game, because you're going to see Harvin stealing some carries, just like he did from Marshawn Lynch. In the receiving game, listen, if somebody tells you this is going to not hurt Decker at all, I don't know what they're looking at. I mean, the guy is going to lose some targets. Jeremy Curley, Greg Salas, David Nelson, they're not stealing a big chunk of the targets, whereas Percy Harvin's going to come in and see at least 20%. I mean, it's a pretty hefty chunk, maybe even 25%. At times with Minnesota, he was up near 30%. And, plus you have Jason Morrow, and his role is expanding. He's going to be busy. So Decker is just not going to get the force-fed the ball like he has in several games this year. So I think Decker takes a step down, probably more of a borderline 3 in this offense. And, where do I have Harvin? I think he's probably in the wide receiver 3 conversation as well, just because he can be an explosive player. But I think his upside took a hit in this trade, just because you're going from a balance to run first Seattle offense that's scoring a ton of points to a Jets offense that's very run heavy and not as efficient and definitely not scoring as many touchdowns.
Very good points. You had a topic you wanted to discuss here quickly as we got 15 minutes left in the show.
Yeah, well, first of all, Jimmy Graham, I mean, it looks like, we talked about him earlier. It looks like he's not even he may not be limited at all. He looks like he didn't need to warm up in order to get cleared. He's good to go. So I'm bumping him up a little bit. I think he should be in the top 10 and probably started in all formats. So I'm a little more optimistic about him. And a big news for fantasy football pundits. We all love Kristen Michael in Seattle. He's active for the first time today. That's really exciting. With Harvin gone, that opens up probably a couple rushing opportunities. And you have to imagine they'll get him in the game for a few snaps today. This guy's big, a big explosive game. It was a second-round pick last year. He looks fantastic when he's on the field, and possibly their starter next season. So I'm excited about this. And hey, this is a guy that I still have stashed in a couple of redraft leagues on the end of my bench. If something happens to 28-year-old Lynch, I mean, Michaels is going to be – people are going to be spending 100% of the budget to get him on their team, even with Robert Turbin there. So, hey, if you have an empty roster spot, throw him on the end of your bench right now before the games start.
Yeah, very exciting news there. Now in Chicago, too, just real quick, the inactives are coming through, and Lance Briggs, no surprise, he's going to be out, but also John Bostic. And if you're in a league where you need a linebacker, and everybody needs linebackers this week, DJ Williams is going to be an every down guy. This is what this is telling me. So we're going to see DJ Williams, Shane McClellan, and Kasim Green starting. Indication here would be DJ Williams every down and Kasim Green, and I guarantee DJ Williams is on your waiver wire. So, I mean, if you're really in a pinch there, this is a guy you could chuck into your IDP lineups and probably be pretty happy with the results afterwards. All right, looks like we have a kicker question. We don't get those very frequently, so we might as well address this one quickly. Actually, he's not a kicker question. He's just saying he's rolling with McManus. So good luck with that one. Half-point PPR, Kelvin Benjamin or Ruben Randall? Mike, where are you going with that one?
Ooh, tough one there. They're both very close, but as mentioned, I love Ruben Randall. He's been getting more of a volume than Benjamin. I think the offense is their offense probably pretty even considering how well Carolina's playing. Benjamin probably I'll say definitely a better talent, but I just think the stars are aligning for Randall right now. I give him a tiny edge up against Dallas.
I actually have Benjamin higher this week, just because we don't know if Dallas is going to be able to execute that game plan. If they do limit the snaps or do keep the Giants in the 50s versus where they have been, which is pushing 70, then that's going to definitely create a little bit of a void for targets for Randall. So I do have Benjamin a little bit higher.
And Benjamin is officially active. I mean, that's not a big surprise since he traveled with the team, got through the concussion protocol, so no worries there. I like Randall a little bit more in this play or in this matchup, so I'm going to make that play over Benjamin. But it's super close. Couldn't fault you if you went either direction there. It's one of those good dilemmas to actually have. Two quick quarterback questions, and first one is a pretty simple one. I'll just answer this one and get this one out of the way. Carson Palmer, rest of the season, would you drop Nick Foles for him? No. Keep Nick Foles. Don't drop him. Don't pick up Carson Palmer. And we still don't know if this nerve issue, he's not beyond it entirely yet. So that is a situation that's currently still in flux. But the other one, and I want to toss this to you, Mike, because this is actually something you talked about, I believe, this week with Matthew Berry on his podcast about Robert Griffin III. And really, with him, potentially being back very soon here, what is the outlook rest of the season? And we know your thoughts already on Kirk Cousins, but what do you envision for Robert Griffin when he gets back in there?
Well, I kind of trace it back to that game when he got injured up against Jacksonville. Everyone said, oh, wow, Cousins needs to be owned. He's maybe a quarterback one because he destroyed the struggling Jacksonville defense. Well, Robert Griffin was doing that right out of the gate. I mean, he didn't play much, but he was just tearing them apart and running all over them, throwing efficiently, and then he went down with the injury. He was on pace for a huge game, and that would have certainly changed his outlook from a fantasy perspective going forward. So, I think Griffin's going to come back and be a pretty strong fantasy quarterback. Again, he does a lot with his legs, so he's probably going to be back in a few weeks. I would say at the earliest, probably week 11 after that week 10 bye. So, I mean, if you're struggling at quarterback or you're looking for a big jolt for, maybe you have a good record, you can afford a bench spot for an upside guy where you can play matchups down the stretch. Griffin's a guy to throw on the end of your bench right now. I mean, he's probably going to be a borderline quarterback one once he's back under center.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like that, and a lot of people just sort of downplayed that performance but especially with Cousins really leaving the door wide open, Griffin getting back in there, and again, another player like we talked about earlier who can put points on the board with his legs. So you certainly like that from a fantasy standpoint. Our buddy Mike Costanza, who hangs out with us every week, has a question for us on Twitter, so I wanted to get to his questions here. And the first one is, again, it's another player I think you talked about this week on that podcast, Mike, Alex Smith. Would you start Alex Smith over Joe Flacco?
I think it's close. I may be in the minority here, but I would. I like Alex Smith a lot. This Chiefs offense, I just can't figure it out. I know they don't have a ton of skill position guys, but they keep scoring points every year. They were above average last year. They're actually ahead of that pace this year. They actually have more touchdowns over their final 8 games last year than the Broncos had over their final 8 games. So, the Chiefs' offense, for whatever reason, under Andy Reid, not afraid to throw the ball in a game that could be a shootout with the Chargers, or at least a situation where the Chiefs are going to have to throw the ball a lot. I think that, if you're in a daily league, DraftKings, FanDuel, maybe DraftKings, you're going for the million. And last week we saw the Flacco-Torrey Smith combo come out of nowhere and help people win. I think the guy that at least the guy that was winning before Monday Night Football had that combo. I'm sure the guy who won did as well. You could kind of look to Alex Smith and Dwayne Bowe. I mean, if you want to throw a deep dart here, maybe Bowe scores twice and Smith scores 4 times, something like that. I think that's one of those under-the-radar ones to look at this week. So I like Smith, and I'd use him over Flacco.
Yeah, very interesting stack play there. I like it. Pat, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's a tough game for me to kind of figure out. I mean, San Diego's been a team that's really depressed opposing offenses. It's just they haven't given them a lot of opportunity. Kansas City's coming off a bye, so I don't know how differently they're going to approach the game. I know Mike's bullish on Alex Smith, and it kind of causes me to take second looks at him. I do have Joe Flacco higher this week, not much higher. Mike brings up good points, so that's definitely something to look at.
Keep in mind though, the Chargers, they are coming off that game where they got lit up by Derek Carr too. So I mean, they were pretty good before that, but it's hard to know really what to expect from them after what happened last week.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing play. I can't fault you for making the Alex Smith play. I probably would lean towards Flacco here, but it's a lot closer than people realize, and this could be one of those. Again, maybe this is $1 million play on DraftKings there. Unless Mike's making that play, stealing his thunder. We have another question from our buddy Mike Costanza, so we'll get to that one quickly here as we got 7 minutes left in the show. It's a wide receiver question. You have to sit one of these 3. You have Cecil Shorts, Devontae Adams, or Kendall Wright, Mike.
I'm sitting one of them?
Sitting one.
I'm sitting Adams in that case.
Pat?
Yeah, it's close for me between him and Wright, but I would also sit Adams.
All right, we got a team defense question. I agree with that one there too. Got a team defense question from Eddie, and Eddie, based on your spelling of favorite, it looks like you might be a Brit. So sorry we don't have Ross here this week, but who is the favorite streaming defense this week? And I think we all probably have to agree on this one that Cleveland is going to be the play against the Jags team that has continually given up double-digit fantasy points every single week. But any others that you guys might be looking at if you had to stream a team defense?
Go ahead, Pat.
I do like Baltimore one spot above Cleveland this week. I know they're probably a little more highly owned, so they might not kind of fill that category as a streamer. But I have Baltimore 3rd and Cleveland 4th.
Yeah, I think I actually found Buffalo on waivers in one league this week somehow. But if not them, New England. I think. They're done already. Keep forgetting about that. Looking at my rankings, but next in line for me is Cleveland. I think that's the obvious one here. If they're not available, maybe even look at Chicago hosting Miami. Could be a chance for them to grab a couple turnovers. So that'd be kind of a deep sleeper there of mine.
Yeah, that Buffalo play is perhaps the play of the week if you have the option of getting them, because we're looking at a Minnesota Vikings team that has given up 14 sacks in the last 2 games. 14 sacks in the last 2 games. So the aforementioned Matt Khalil really struggling here. And they have a rookie quarterback, so there is a potential for some big turnovers, a lot of points potentially in that game. On the other side of that, though, if you're in a deep league where people are rostering two-team defenses, I've seen this way too many times. It's silly, but people do it. Minnesota. Buffalo has given up double-digit fantasy points in each of the last 4 weeks in standard team defense scoring. So, I mean, it's not going to be a huge game, but you want to put points on the board. And Minnesota, I mean, it's an interesting play that you could do certainly a whole lot worse. And Eddie is Canadian. All right, so the Canadians, I didn't realize they put the OU in favor. So either way, let's head back over to Twitter quickly here. We got 4 minutes left in the show. And, you know, now given the news of Jimmy Graham, are you still starting Jordan Reed over Jimmy Graham, Mike?
You know, I don't think I'm quite as high as many on Reed, so I think I would. I think I would go with Jimmy Graham. It's a little risky, but man, that's a tough call. My main reservations with Reed, I think, is volume, just because I think it's in one of them situations where I think Alfred Morris is going to be very busy. I think Pat mentioned that before, but I did mention that earlier in the week as well. I think that Morris is in for a big day. They're going to be able to run the ball against Tennessee. They want to run the ball. They want to limit Cousins blowing the game or chances to throw interceptions in the second half. So, you know, I think if Reed doesn't come out and score a touchdown early, it may be problematic for his owners. Whereas, you know, I think Breeze is going to be busy throwing the ball. It's going to be hard for him to score touchdowns, but with Graham in there, if he's close to 100% or maybe even 80%, that certainly helps that offense out.
Thoughts on that one there, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with this. With the new news, I mean, if Graham is going to play, you know, even half the snaps as opposed to 20 to 25, like we might have thought on the way into this show, you know, that puts him up into the top 5, and I don't have Reed in the top 5.
Yeah, it's really a tough dilemma, but it's almost now, given this news, it's like how can you really sit Jimmy Graham? I'm going to probably go in that direction there. And that is my dog barking in the background. Finishing the show up here, 3 minutes left. 2 plays. We need to start 2 out of this list. It's a healthy list here. Isaiah Crowell, Justin Hunter, Odell Beckham, Marcus Wheaton, and Larry Donnell. Mike, you have to start 2 out of those guys. Crowell, Hunter, Beckham, Wheaton, Donnell.
I'm probably going to lean against Crowell with Terrence West active today, and of course Ben Tate leading that backfield. I think I'm probably going to go. Hunter was on the list, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd probably go. I think I'd go Justin Hunter and Larry Donnell.
What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, definitely Hunter. I'm kind of waffling between Beckham and Donnell, but yeah, I mean, until we see a little more of how they're going to use Beckham, I think Donnell's got the safer role. So I agree with Mike.
Yeah, I'm going to side with that one as well. Folks, if you're in the chat, we got 2 minutes left. But just going to toss this over to Mike. Any other general thoughts about this week? Any plays that maybe under the radar you might be making we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, I think folks are probably going to be down a little bit on Golden Tate after he didn't do, you know, I think expectations were so massive last week that he was kind of a letdown. I think he caught 7 balls for 50 yards, something like that. But keep in mind that, you know, with Johnson limited to, you know, barely playing in weeks 4 and 5 and then out last week, he saw 30% of the targets in all 3 of those games. And last week was actually the highest. He was at 39% of Detroit's throws. So, you know, the Lions, you know, they're struggling offensively, but guys that see that sort of volume are going to score fantasy points. So it could be kind of one of them post-hype situations here where people just kind of overlook Tate, especially in daily leagues, and he comes out and has a big day. We know this guy's a pretty nice talent. So, you know, I still think Tate probably, it's hard to say he's anything other than a borderline wide receiver 1 option this week.
Any general thoughts at the end of the show here, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with Mike's thoughts on Tate. One guy I'm looking, if you're desperate for a running back play, Jeremy Hill. I think that you know, Cincinnati's definitely going to want to try to, you know, hold the ball a little bit. I mean, obviously their passing game is pretty decimated, and Indy's been really running a lot of plays. So I think Jeremy Hill's going to get a pretty big workload today, and Indy can be run on. So I think that dual backfield is going to be in full effect.
Yeah, they don't want anything to happen to Gio. A little gasp at the end of last week when he was injured there. All right, that's going to do it for us for Week 7. So best of luck to you this week. We'll be back again in Week 8, same time, same place. So we'll see you then for Pro Football Focus Fantasy. For Mike Clay, for Pat Thorman, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and that's a wrap, folks.